He was a carpenter with 30 days to save his daughter from homelessness. She was the coldest woman in Portland, sitting on a billion-dollar empire she couldn't walk away from. They called him a gold digger. They called her a cripple. But when the preacher asked for objections, it wasn't a voice from the crowd that stopped the ceremony. It was the bride herself. Stick around, because you need to hear how a simple signature turned into the most heartbreaking revenge in history. The rain in Portland didn't just fall, it felt like a judgment. It was a relentless gray curtain that had been hanging over the city for weeks, turning the streets into slick mirrors and the mood of the city into something somber. For Tyson, standing on the porch of the small, peeling bungalow in the North District, the rain felt personal. It matched the heavy, suffocating pressure in his chest that hadn't lifted in 2 years. He held a letter in his large, calloused hand. His knuckles were scarred from years of framing houses, pouring concrete, and working with rough timber. He was a man who built things. He was a man who fixed things. But looking at the red stamp on the envelope that read "Final Notice," he realized he couldn't fix this. Inside the house, the air smelled of damp wood and old coffee. It was a smell that used to mean home, but now it just smelled like failure. He could hear the low hum of the television in the living room. His 6-year-old daughter, Sophie, was watching cartoons. She was singing along to a commercial jingle, her voice high and sweet, completely unaware that her father was holding their eviction in his hand. Tyson walked into the kitchen and sat at the small, wobbly table. He placed the letter next to a stack of unpaid medical bills. It had been 2 years since the accident, 2 years since the rock slide in the gorge took his wife, Nia. It wasn't fair. That was the only thought that cycled through his mind day after day. It wasn't fair. They had been happy. They were hiking on a Saturday, taking selfies by a waterfall. Then a rumble, a cloud of dust, and silence. The insurance company called it an act of providence. They cited a clause in the fine print about unauthorized trails and natural disasters. They denied the claim. Tyson had fought them. He spent every dime of their savings on lawyers who promised him justice but only delivered invoices. Between the funeral costs, the legal fees, and the mortgage he could no longer split with a second income, he was drowning. He rubbed his face with his hands. He had 30 days. 30 days to come up with $80,000 to clear the arrears and penalties, or the bank would take the house. The house where Sophie took her first steps. The house where he and Nia had painted the nursery yellow because they didn't know if they were having a boy or a girl. Losing the house felt like losing Nia all over again. Tyson stood up and checked his watch. He couldn't wallow. He had a shift. Tyson worked as the maintenance manager for the Winthrop estate. It was a cruel irony. He spent his days keeping a 20-bedroom mansion perfect while his own 2-bedroom bungalow rotted away. The Winthrop estate sat on the cliffs of the West Hills, a fortress of stone and glass that looked down on the city like a king on a throne. The owner was Eleanor Winthrop. If you lived in the Pacific Northwest, you knew the Winthrop name. It was stamped on shipping containers, logistics trucks, and towering office buildings. But the current head of the family, Eleanor, was a ghost. At 32, she was arguably the most powerful woman in the state, but she was rarely seen. 5 years ago, Eleanor had been inspecting a new automated shipyard when a catwalk collapsed. It was a catastrophic failure of engineering. She survived, but her spine was severed. She had been confined to a motorized wheelchair ever since. The local tabloids called her the Ice Queen. They said the accident had stripped away her humanity, leaving behind a cold, ruthless calculator who fired staff for smiling too loud. Tyson had worked at the estate for 14 months. In that time, he had seen Eleanor maybe 3 times. She moved through the house like a shadow, the hum of her electric chair the only warning of her approach. She never said hello. She never asked about his day. She only pointed out flaws, a squeaky hinge, a drafty window, a hedge that wasn't perfectly square. That morning, Tyson was assigned to the library. It was a room 2 stories high, filled with books that had never been opened. The storm outside was battering the north wall, and one of the heavy mahogany window sashes had jammed shut.
Tyson was on his knees, his tools spread out on a drop cloth. He was working the wood mechanism, trying to be gentle with the antique frame. His mind, however, was back at the kitchen table with the bank notice. The stress was a physical weight pressing behind his eyes.
He stopped working. He couldn't help it. He sat back on his heels, pulled the crumpled letter from his back pocket, and stared at it again. $80,000. It might as well have been 80 million. He felt a tear, hot and humiliating, slide down his cheek. He quickly wiped it away with his dirty sleeve, taking a shuddering breath. "You're going to smudge the ink if you cry on it." The voice was cool, sharp, and imperious. Tyson jumped, nearly dropping his chisel. He scrambled to his feet, turning around. Eleanor Winthrop was sitting in her chair in the shadow of the fireplace. She was wearing a dark gray suit, her legs covered by a black blanket. Her face was pale, her features sharp and angular, framed by severe dark hair. She wasn't looking at him, she was looking at the fire. "I apologize, Miss Winthrop," Tyson stammered, his heart hammering against his ribs. "I didn't know you were in the room. I thought I was alone. I'll get back to work." "Leave the paper," she said. Tyson froze. "Ma'am?" "The paper you were staring at, the one that made a grown man weep in the middle of the workday. Put it on the table." It was an order, not a request. Tyson hesitated. His pride screamed at him to put it away, to walk out. But pride doesn't pay the mortgage. Slowly, he walked over and placed the foreclosure notice on the low reading table next to her chair. Eleanor motored her chair forward. She picked up the document with slender, manicured fingers. Her eyes scanned the page. She didn't look shocked. She didn't look sympathetic. She looked like she was reading a stock report. "Foreclosure," she said flatly. 30 days, $80,000. She looked up at him then. Her eyes were a startling shade of blue, like ice on a lake. "And you have a daughter, Sophie. Is that correct?" "Yes, ma'am," Tyson said, his voice tight. "She's 6. "And you are a widower?" "Yes." Eleanor placed the paper back on the table. She steepled her fingers, studying him. It made Tyson feel like a bug under a microscope. "I have a problem, Tyson," she said, her voice devoid of emotion, "and you have a problem. It occurs to me that we might be able to solve them simultaneously." Tyson frowned. "I don't understand." "Sit down," she commanded. Tyson sat on the edge of a velvet armchair, feeling his work boots were staining the invisible air of the room. "My board of directors, Tyson," Eleanor began, her tone hardening, "is attempting a hostile takeover. The lead director, a man named Sterling Caldwell, is a vulture. He believes that a woman in a wheelchair is too fragile, too emotionally compromised to run a logistics empire. He has dug up a clause in my grandfather's founding bylaws. It states that if the female heir is not married by her 33rd birthday, control of the company reverts to a board of trustees. They want to push me out." She glanced at the grandfather clock ticking in the corner. "My 33rd birthday is in 3 weeks." Tyson blinked. I still don't see what this has to do with me, Miss Winthrop." "I need a husband," she stated, as casually as if she were asking for a glass of water. "I do not need a partner. I do not need a lover. I need a legal signature on a marriage license. I need a man who is physically imposing enough to intimidate Caldwell, yet desperate enough to agree to my terms. You are a widower. You are quiet. You are hard-working. And, judging by this final notice, you are desperate." She tapped the foreclosure letter. "Here is the deal. I will pay off your mortgage in full. I will set up an irrevocable trust fund for Sophie's education. She will go to the best schools, debt-free. In exchange, you will marry me. We will remain married for exactly 1 year. You will live here, in the estate, but in the East Wing. We will appear in public as a couple. In private, we stay out of each other's way. After 365 days, we file for an uncontested divorce. You keep the money, you keep the house, you walk away." Tyson felt the room spin. It was insane.
It was a transaction. It was selling himself. "You want me to fake a marriage?" Tyson whispered. "I want you to enter a business arrangement," Eleanor corrected. "It happens all the time in my world, Tyson. We are just being honest about the terms." "I can't," Tyson said, standing up. "I can't do that. It's wrong. My wife—" "Your wife is gone," Eleanor said. It was harsh, but she didn't say it with malice. She said it like a fact. "But your daughter is here, and in 30 days she will be homeless. The foster care system is not kind to single fathers who lose their residence, Tyson. Do you want to gamble on keeping custody while living in a motel?" The words hit him like a physical blow. The threat of losing Sophie, the thought of failing her. He looked at the woman in the wheelchair. She was powerful, rich, and completely alone. She was offering him a lifeline, but it was wrapped in barbed wire. "1 year?" Tyson asked, his voice cracking. "1 year," Eleanor confirmed. "Strictly business." Tyson looked at the rain hitting the window. He closed his eyes. "Okay, I'll do it."
3 days later, Tyson signed the contract. It was a prenuptial agreement thick enough to be a novel. It stipulated that he had no claim to her assets, no claim to the company, and that he would receive nothing if he terminated the marriage before the 365 days were up. He signed it without reading it. He just wanted the check for the bank. The move into the Winthrop estate was a culture shock that Tyson wasn't prepared for. They packed their lives into 4 cardboard boxes and drove up the winding cliffside road in Tyson's beat-up truck. Sophie thought it was a fairy tale. When she saw the iron gates open, her eyes went wide. "Daddy, is this a castle?" she asked from her booster seat. "Sort of, baby," Tyson said, gripping the steering wheel. "It's just a big house where we're going to stay for a while." "Is the princess nice?" Tyson didn't know how to answer that. "We'll see." The reality of living in the estate was far from a fairy tale. It was cold. The hallways were vast and echoed with every footstep. The staff, maids, cooks, groundskeepers, looked at Tyson with thinly veiled suspicion. They knew he was the maintenance man. Now he was the fiancé. The whispers stopped whenever he walked into a room, leaving a heavy silence in his wake. Eleanor was true to her word. She kept to the West Wing. Tyson and Sophie were given a suite in the East Wing. It was luxurious, filled with antiques and silk drapes, but it felt sterile. Tyson spent the first few nights awake, listening to the silence, feeling like an intruder in a museum. But the hardest part wasn't the house, it was the world outside. When the press release went out announcing the engagement of Eleanor Winthrop to Tyson Miller, a local handyman, the media went into a feeding frenzy. Photographers camped at the gates. The headlines were brutal. "The billionaire and the blue-collar, true love or the ultimate gold dig. The crippled heiress buys a husband." They dug into his past. They published photos of his foreclosure notice. They called him a desperate opportunist. They analyzed his cheap clothes. They called Eleanor pathetic. Tyson tried to shield Sophie from it, keeping the TV off and the tablets hidden, but he couldn't shield himself. The villain of this story, Mr. Sterling Caldwell, made sure of that. Caldwell was a man who looked like he was carved out of expensive soap, slick, polished, and slippery. He came to the estate a week before the wedding for a strategy meeting. He found Tyson in the barrage, where Tyson was hiding out, working on an old engine just to get grease on his hands again, just to feel like himself. Caldwell walked in, his Italian loafers clicking on the concrete. "So," Caldwell said, his voice oozing with false charm, "this is where the groom hides. Fixing engines. Old habits die hard, I suppose." Tyson wiped his hands on a rag, standing up to his full height. He towered over Caldwell, but the smaller man didn't flinch. Money gives men a different kind of confidence. "Can I help you, Mr. Caldwell?" Tyson asked. "I just came to get a look at the investment," Caldwell sneered. "Eleanor thinks she's clever, buying a husband to bypass the bylaws. But you should know, Mr. Miller, we are going to invalidate this marriage. We have lawyers who will prove coercion or fraud, and when we do, you'll be back in the gutter where she found you." "I'm not doing this for money."
though he knew it was a half-lie. Caldwell laughed. It was a dry, ugly sound. Everyone does it for money, even her. She's buying dignity. You're selling it. It's a fair trade, I suppose. Just don't get comfortable. Props get thrown away after the play is over. Caldwell turned and walked away, leaving Tyson shaking with rage. But amidst the coldness and the cruelty, something unexpected began to bloom. It started with Sophie. Sophie didn't understand social boundaries. She didn't understand that the West Wing was off limits. One rainy afternoon, while Tyson was on a call with the school district, Sophie wandered off. When Tyson realized she was gone, a panic seized him. He ran through the corridors, calling her name. He burst into the conservatory, a massive glass room filled with exotic plants and the sound of rain drumming on the roof. He stopped dead in his tracks. Eleanor was there, sitting in her wheelchair by a bed of orchids. Sophie was standing right next to her. Tyson expected Eleanor to be angry. He expected her to be yelling. Instead, Eleanor was quiet. "Does it hurt?" Sophie asked, pointing to the chair. "No," Eleanor said, her voice stiff but not unkind. "It doesn't hurt. My legs just don't listen to me anymore." "My mom went to heaven," Sophie said matter-of-factly. "She hurt her head. Does your head hurt?" Eleanor looked down at the little girl. For a second, the mask of the CEO slipped. Tyson saw a flash of profound sadness in her eyes. "Sometimes," Eleanor whispered, "but mostly my heart hurts." "Daddy fixes things," Sophie said, reaching out and patting Eleanor's hand. "Maybe he can fix your heart." Tyson stepped forward then, clearing his throat. Eleanor's head snapped up. The mask slammed back into place instantly. "She was disturbing my reading," Eleanor said coldly, pulling her hand away. "Please keep her in your quarters, Tyson. This is a place of business." Tyson picked Sophie up. "I'm sorry. It won't happen again." As he walked away, he glanced back. Eleanor wasn't reading. She was watching them leave, and she looked more lonely than anyone Tyson had ever seen. The tension culminated the night before the wedding. There was a mandatory dinner with the full board of directors. It was a power play by Caldwell, forcing Eleanor to parade her fiancé in front of the wolves. The dining room was dimly lit by chandeliers. The table was set with silver and crystal. Tyson sat to Eleanor's right. He was wearing a tuxedo that Eleanor's stylist had fitted him for. It fit perfectly, but he felt like he was wearing a costume. Caldwell sat across from them, drinking scotch. "So, Tyson," Caldwell began, loudly enough for the whole table to hear, "Eleanor tells us you were the maintenance man. Tell me, what is the most difficult stain you've ever had to remove? I imagine you're an expert in cleaning up messes." The other board members snickered. Tyson gripped his fork. He looked at Eleanor. She was staring straight ahead, her jaw clenched. She was enduring it, just like she endured everything. "I didn't just clean messes, Mr. Caldwell," Tyson said, his voice low. "I fixed things that were broken, structural things, foundations, the things that hold the roof up over your head so you can sit there and drink your scotch without the sky falling on you." Caldwell smirked. "How poetic. The philosopher with a mop." "It's dignity," Tyson said, his voice rising slightly. "My father taught me that there is dignity in labor. There is dignity in working with your hands. I build. You simply move money from one pile to another. If the world ends tomorrow, I can build a shelter. You can only freeze to death clutching your bank statements." The silence that followed was absolute. Caldwell's face turned red. "How dare you?" he hissed. "He's right." The voice came from the head of the table, Eleanor. She turned her chair to face Caldwell. "Tyson is right. He creates value. You extract it. You have spent the last 5 years waiting for me to fail, waiting for me to be too weak. But I am still here, and tomorrow I will be married, and your little coup will be over. Now, if you are finished insulting my fiancé, you may leave." Caldwell stood up, throwing his napkin on the table.
Enjoy your victory lap, Eleanor. But remember, a contract marriage is a fragile thing. One slip-up and we take it all." He stormed out. The dinner ended in awkward silence, but as the guests filed out, Tyson felt a strange sensation. He looked at Eleanor, and for the first time they were on the same side. Later that night, Tyson couldn't sleep. The adrenaline from the confrontation was still pumping through him. He stepped out onto the balcony of his suite. To his surprise, he saw the glow of a cigarette on the adjacent balcony, Eleanor's suite. "I didn't know you smoked," Tyson said across the gap. "I don't," Eleanor's voice floated back in the darkness. "I just light them and watch them burn down. It's a bad habit from the hospital." "Thank you for what you said at dinner." "He needed to be silenced," she replied. "You held your ground. Most men would have folded." "I've got nothing left to lose," Tyson said. He looked up at the moon. "You know, when Nia died, the insurance company, they treated us like numbers, just like Caldwell. They didn't care that she was a person, they just cared about the policy loophole. I swore I'd never let anyone treat Sophie like that." "The world is transactional, Tyson," Eleanor said softly. "It's a marketplace. You have to be a shark or you are bait." "I don't believe that," Tyson said. "Nia wasn't a shark. She was the kindest person I ever knew. She worked at that rehab center downtown. She used to come home exhausted, her back aching, but she'd say, 'Ty, I helped someone walk 3 steps today,' and she'd be glowing. That's not a transaction. That's grace." Eleanor went very quiet. The cigarette burned down to the filter in her hand. "Nia," she whispered. It sounded like a prayer. "Yeah, Nia." "Good night, Tyson," Eleanor said abruptly. She spun her chair around and motored back inside, slamming the glass door behind her. Tyson stood there, confused. He felt like he had touched a raw nerve, but he didn't know why. The wedding day dawned gray and blustery. The ceremony was to be held in the great hall of the estate. It was not a private affair. The board was there. The press was allowed in the back. It was a spectacle designed to prove a legal point. Tyson stood at the altar. The heavy scent of lilies filled the air. Funeral flowers, he thought grimly. He looked at Sophie in the front row. She gave him a thumbs up. He forced a smile for her. Then the music started. Not a traditional wedding march, but a classical piece, somber and regal. The doors opened. Eleanor entered. She had refused to let anyone push her. She navigated the aisle herself. She wore white, a silk gown that draped elegantly over her chair. Her hair was swept up, exposing her long neck. She was beautiful, terrifyingly so. She reached the altar. The priest began the liturgy. It felt mechanical. "Do you, Tyson, take this woman?" "I do." "Do you, Eleanor, take this man?" "I do." It was done. The gavel had banged. They were legally bound. But the story wasn't over. The reception was held in the ballroom immediately after. This was where the real battle would be fought. Caldwell was already holding court near the bar, speaking loudly to a group of shareholders. He was clearly preparing a toast, one that would likely be filled with backhanded compliments and subtle threats. But before Caldwell could grab the microphone, Eleanor moved. She rolled herself to the center of the dance floor. She signaled the DJ to cut the music. The room fell into a hush. "If I could have your attention," Eleanor's voice rang out, amplified by the microphone she held. She looked around the room. She looked at the cameras flashing in the back. She looked at the board members who wanted her gone. And finally, she looked at Tyson. "Most of you here today think this is a joke," Eleanor began. Her voice was steady, but her hands were trembling slightly on the controls of her chair. "You think this marriage is a sham, a desperate maneuver by a crippled heiress to keep her throne." A ripple of uneasy murmurs went through the crowd. Caldwell smirked, swirling his drink. "You think I bought a husband. You think Tyson is here for the money. You think he is a pawn." She paused. "You are right that this started as a contract,"
she admitted. Tyson froze. What was she doing? She was admitting it? This would void the bylaws. This would destroy everything. "But you are wrong about why I chose him," Eleanor said, her voice rising. She turned her chair so she was facing Tyson directly. "I didn't choose Tyson because he was desperate. I chose him because of who he was married to before me." Tyson frowned, his brow furrowing. The room was deadly silent. "4 years ago," Eleanor said, tears suddenly welling in her eyes, "I was a patient at the Portland Rehabilitation Center. I had just lost my legs. My life as I knew it was over. I was angry. I was hateful. I treated the staff like dirt. I refused to do my therapy. I wanted to die." She took a ragged breath. "There was one nurse, just one. She refused to let me quit. When I threw my tray at her, she picked it up and told me to try again. When I cried, she sat with me. She told me I wasn't defined by what I couldn't do, but by who I was inside. She told me stories to distract me from the pain. She told me about her husband, a carpenter who could build anything. She told me about her daughter who loved to color."
Tyson felt his knees go weak. He grabbed the back of a chair to steady himself. "That nurse saved my life," Eleanor said, the tears spilling over now. "She rebuilt me, piece by piece. Her name was Nia." The sound of that name in the massive ballroom was like a thunderclap. Tyson stared at Eleanor, his mouth open. Nia, his Nia. She had been Eleanor's nurse. She never mentioned names. She never violated patient confidentiality. "When Nia died in the rock slide," Eleanor continued, "I was devastated, but I was still hiding in this house. I didn't go to the funeral because I was ashamed of my wheelchair. I lost track of her family." She wiped her face. "When Tyson started working here, I didn't make the connection, not until I saw Sophie. She has Nia's eyes, and when Tyson spoke about dignity, I heard Nia's voice." Eleanor reached into the folds of her dress. She pulled out a thick document, the prenuptial agreement. "Mr. Caldwell," Eleanor said, turning to the stunned director, "you think this marriage is about protecting my money? You think I trapped this man?" She held the document up. "Tyson married me to save his daughter from homelessness. He sacrificed his pride to protect his child. He is twice the man any of you will ever be." With a sudden, violent motion, Eleanor ripped the contract in half. The sound echoed. She tore it again and again. She threw the pieces onto the floor. "There is no contract," Eleanor declared. "Tyson, I didn't just pay off your mortgage." She looked at him, her eyes pleading for forgiveness. "I bought the banknote, and I transferred the deed to the house into your name, free and clear, 3 days ago. Whether you stay married to me or walk out that door right now, the house is yours, the money is yours, you are free." She looked back at the board. "But if he stays, he is my husband, and as my husband, under the bylaws, he holds a voting proxy, which means the coup is over. Sterling Caldwell, you are fired." The room erupted. It wasn't applause, it was chaos. Reporters were shouting questions. Caldwell dropped his glass, it shattered on the floor. But Tyson didn't hear any of it. He only saw Eleanor. He saw the woman who had been hiding behind a wall of ice, terrified of being hurt again, terrified of facing the husband of the woman who saved her. He saw her shaking. Tyson walked across the dance floor. His heavy boots clicked on the marble. He stopped in front of her chair. He ignored the cameras. He ignored Caldwell screaming at his lawyers. He knelt down, one knee on the ground so he was eye level with her. "Nia told me about you," Tyson whispered. Eleanor flinched. "She did? She never used your name," Tyson said, his voice thick with emotion. "But she said she had a patient, a tough nut, she called you. She said, Ty, this woman has a fire inside her. If she ever stops fighting herself, she's going to set the world on fire." Eleanor let out a sob, covering her mouth with her hand. "I missed her so much. I felt so guilty that I lived and she didn't."
Tyson reached out and took her hand. It was cold, but his was warm. He squeezed it. You didn't have to tear up the contract, Eleanor. You just had to tell me. I was afraid, she admitted. I didn't think anyone could love a broken thing. Tyson smiled. It was the first genuine smile he had felt in years. I'm a carpenter, Elle. I don't see broken things. I see things that are just waiting to be rebuilt. He stood up, still holding her hand. He turned to the crowd. He looked at Caldwell, who was being escorted out by security. My wife, Tyson announced, his voice booming over the chaos, is tired. We are going to take a walk. The bar is open. Drink up because it's on the board's tab. He put his hand on the back of her chair, but she stopped him. No, Eleanor said. She looked up at him, her eyes shining. Walk beside me. I can drive myself. Yes, ma'am, Tyson grinned.
They walked out of the ballroom together, side by side. Sophie ran up to them, grabbing Tyson's other hand. "Did we win, Daddy?" Sophie asked. Tyson looked at his daughter. He looked at the deed to his house that was waiting for him. He looked at Eleanor, who was laughing through her tears. "Yeah, baby," Tyson said. "We won." Later that night, the rain finally stopped. The clouds broke, and the moon shone down on the Winthrop estate. Tyson and Eleanor sat on the balcony, sharing a quiet moment. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. They were practically strangers who had just dropped a nuclear bomb on their lives. They had a lot to learn about each other. But as Tyson looked out over the city, he didn't feel the crushing weight anymore. He felt light. He had saved his house. He had saved his daughter. And in a strange, twisted way, he had saved the woman who had once been saved by his wife. Kindness is a circle. It travels out, touches a life, and sometimes, years later, it comes back to you when you need it most. If you believe that good things come to those who fight for their families, hit that like button. If you believe that love is stronger than any contract, share this video. And don't forget to subscribe to True Black Tales. We tell the stories that matter, the stories of us, and I'll see you in the next one.